Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Welcome to the November 3rd meeting of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Get the agenda in front of me. We're have our new last month we voted on our remote participation policy, so we're going to give it a try. I know we've had one request that was submitted earlier before this morning, but I believe there are 2 or 3 folks that have logged on that are wishing to participate. When Ms. Firestone calls the roll, hopefully everybody remote can hear us. That's part of the requirement, that we can hear you and you can hear us. But when your name is called, if you wish to participate remotely, please make that request and state the reason why. And then at the end of this, I'm going to try to apply the policy to the best of my ability to each request. And then the rule calls for the policy board to make a motion to either accept or reject my interpretation and decision on the policy, whether these folks can participate remotely. Remember, remote participation cannot make the quorum. So Ms. Firestone is going to be keeping, when she goes through the roll, she'll be keeping tabs on, status of a quorum among the folks present. But thank you all for joining us this morning. We don't have a long agenda, but I think we have several fun and exciting things to chat about. So with that, I did want to make one. Oh yeah, we want a flag. We will do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I have one introduction, and then we'll go to the roll call. But if we can, it's probably a little tricky to try to put a flag on this, but we will just act as if there's a flag there, and let's start.
Mr. Carroll has a flag on his lapel.
We can always keep Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That was a good catch.
Problem solver over here.
And please, policy board members, if there's anybody you want to introduce, please do so. But I'm just want to make a quick introduction. Joining us this morning is Crystal Onitis. So there, and she's Goochland County's new deputy county administrator. Before joining us, she was city manager in the city of Covington, out in Allegheny County, but she's a Henrico native and has worked for the city. And I think you've already spoken to people here that you've worked with at the city. So we welcome Crystal, and thank you, Crystal, for joining us for the TPO meeting. Policy board members, anybody else that wish to introduce? All right, thank you. Ms. Firestone, if you would do a roll call. Sir.
Yes, Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart. Charles City County, Mr. Atkins.
Here.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Here.
Mr. Holland,
Here.
Mr. Winslow.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, pause there. Mr. Winslow, would you mind just requesting that you participate remotely and state the reason?
I so make that request. I apologize. I had a law appointment this morning that sort of overlapped with the executive and part of this meeting.
Thank you.
Ms. Carroll. Goochland County, Chair Lumpkins.
Here.
Ms. Lascalette. Hanover County, Vice Chair Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Davis. Ms. Pritchard. Henrico County, Ms. O'Bannon.
Here.
Mr. Thornton. Mr. Brannon. New Kent County, Ms. Page. Mr. Tiller. Mr. Evelyn. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Here.
Ms. Carmack. City of Richmond, Mr. Addison.
Here.
Ms. Jordan,
Here.
Ms. Lynch. Dr. Newville. Mr. Jones. Ms. Nye. Ms. Robertson. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC, Ms. Adams.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Dean. VDOT, Mr. Rivlet.
Here.
CTAC, Ms. Guthrie.
Here.
Yeah. Oh,
Ms.
okay,
Guthrie
yeah.
needs to.
Ms. Guthrie, would you mind, if you wish to participate by voting, would you mind making that request and stating the reason that you're participating remotely this morning?
I don't believe I'm entitled to a vote.
She's not voting, but still needs to.
So I'm looking for a ruling here. Do we just bypass that and
She's still a member.
okay, I'm hearing from our council that even though you're non-voting, you're still a member. So you know, if you wish to participate remotely, I mean, I know you're going to listen in, which is perfectly fine. It's up to you. Is there a reason that you're participating remotely?
I have work conflicts today that would prevent me from traveling to Ashland.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Guthrie.
Ms. Erickson. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Hi, this is Grant Sparks. I'm the alternate on the TPO, and Ms. Dubinsky, she is dialed in, but she's feeling ill this morning. I believe she submitted a request for remote participation yesterday because her children are ill, and she informed me this morning that she is now ill. So I'm filling in for her today.
So I don't know, is he an alternate? Is he a designated alternate?
Yes.
Okay, same thing, I think, you're non-voting, is that correct? So same request.
I think he's given us good reason already.
Yeah, you've given us, yeah, and so it's Mr. Sparks. And you've given us the reason. Thank you, and thank you for joining us. Next.
Federal Highway Administration, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Rucker.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. Ivan Rucker, Federal Highway Administration, non-voting member. I certainly appreciate the flexibility to participate remotely. I do have a meeting immediately following the meeting today, which prevents me from participating in person. So the flexibility allows me to participate in both meetings, and I certainly appreciate that. And as well as in the future, if I have a meeting prior to this policy board meeting, that flexibility, the extended flexibility to participating remotely will allow me to participate in both meetings. So I appreciate the flexibility. Thank you.
1 second.
Thank you, Mr. Rucker.
Federal Transit Administration, Mr. Koenig. Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale.
Here.
Ms. Ruffin. And Virginia Department of Aviation, Mr. Harrington. That concludes the roll call for attendance. We do have a quorum present.
So thank you, Ms. Firestone. I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself, but we do have a quorum, not counting the remote participants.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. That's good. So I'm going to, we have Mr. Winslow, Mr. Sparks for Ms. Dubinsky. Ms. Dubinsky did make the request earlier. I'm sorry she caught whatever's going around her family and can't join us, but I'm going to go ahead and approve all of Mr. Winslow, Ms. Guthrie, Mr. Sparks, and Mr. Rucker. I believe that covers everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, I said Ms. Guthrie. So if the chair will entertain a motion to confirm or reject the chair's decision to approve all of the requests this morning for remote participation in conformance with our new policy for remote participation of members. And of course, that will continue as long as the participants can hear us and we can hear them.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
And it was moved by Mr. Peterson
Second.
and Jordan seconded. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate everybody's participation and navigating. Are there any requests for amendments to the meeting agenda?
Yes,
Mr. Williams.
I'd like to amend the agenda to continue a follow-up from, I believe it was either our April or May meeting where we requested information from staff regarding cost overruns with projects. And the reason I'm continuing to pursue this is because I feel it's very important for us as an organization that does planning and funding of transportation in Central Virginia to have a understanding of where these cost overruns are coming from. Now, I realize that every capital improvement plan in the world is underneath water. But all that said, I think we need more specificity in understanding what is the etiology of these cost overruns? Is it supply chain problems? Is it inflation? Is it our cost estimates? But exactly what is the reason or reasons? So again, I'm asking for that to be part of our discussion this morning.
Okay, I would suggest that we ask Mr. Parsons if it's the consensus of the policy board to add that. I would say that we would add it as B5, and because I think our scenario planning update on the agenda, or the follow-up, we had a very brief introduction to scenario planning last time, but the meeting was going long, so I asked that it be carried over. That's a carryover with a little deeper dive, but still not. I think 15 minutes is more than enough time for that. I would request that we add.
I'll second this motion,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to add that. We'll put it at B5 and ask Mr. Parsons to speak to how the TPO staff, he and his staff could help ask that, start to address that question that.
Well, I want to know where we are in the process,
Okay,
because
fair.
the requests have been made by the body to have that information. So I want to know where we are and when we can anticipate getting information.
Okay. All right, there's a motion and a second to make that amendment to the agenda. All in favor of accepting the agenda with that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will. Good, thank you, Mr. Williams. We have an agenda. Next is the approval of last month's policy board minute meetings. Hope everybody got a chance to review those. Chair will entertain a motion to approve, or if there are any amendments or comments.
I'll put motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Holland, thank you.
Second.
Mr. Williams seconds to approve the policy board minute meetings from October 6th. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
One abstention, I was not here.
Peterson abstains. Thank you. All right, that passes. All right, we now move to the open public comment period. If anybody in the room and is anybody online seeking to speak to the policy board?
No, sir, we haven't had any requests.
No one online, no one here. So I will close the open and close the public comment period. And then we will roll right into the action. I'm sorry. not action items yet, but the chair report. And I'm not going to take time now, but the executive committee, well, it'll take a minute. The executive committee did talk a little bit about, well, we talked 15 or 20 minutes about the planning for the transportation board. We're landing on maybe doing something in April, location to be determined. There was a strong interest on the executive committee that we pick a location that maybe is transportation relevant. You know, ideas are train stations and places like that. So I talked to our city council members this morning and told them I'm going to follow up with them later about some ideas to make sure that, you know, they know where we're heading. But, you know, next month we're going to have, you know, an updated report, but we are looking at an April day, try to limit it to a half day or be wrapping up by 1 or 1:30. So, and we're going to do some more engagement with the public. We have some ideas. We're going to talk to some partners in the region about their participation. So more on that next month, and I'll certainly share more with the policy board, but your executive committee is doing its job and we're moving forward with planning that. That's all I have, but we are excited. I don't know that we're in the town proper, but the address here we are is in Ashland, and we're in Hanover County, and we're delighted to hear about from Mr. Hodges. This month's highlight is the town of Ashland, which is now, I know, going to be known as the terminus of the Fall Line Trail and no longer center of the universe. So with that, but what a dud. That was a terrible way to start. It's still the center of the universe. But thank you, Mr. Hodges. We look forward to hearing about Ashland.
Thank you. It's going to set up. Want to welcome everybody to the northern end of the planning district. We appreciate you coming this far north. You're not quite far north enough. Ashland begins in about 100 yards from here, or a couple 100 yards. We're off the next interchange north. Is our interchange. And wanted to welcome you to this wonderful facility. It's in the county, but it's in the zip code for Ashland, which is the next slide. We're the center of a community. Ashland was formed because it's of the railroad that runs through the town. The zip code is a little larger, but we're in the 23005 zip code. The town of Ashland is off of I-95. We got our start because of a railroad track. We're the home to Randolph-Macon College, about 1,400 students, beautiful campus right downtown. We're part of Hanover County. We're the only municipality or town in the region. And we're proud to be part of the county, which provides schools and public utilities. And we provide police, planning, and amenities, parks, recreation, which you'll see. Next slide. I was going to talk about 5 projects. One, the Fall Line Trail leading to the center of the universe, not the end of the Fall Line Trail. Downtown streetscape project that we have, electric EVs, we talked about earlier. Visitor center, which is really the Ashland train station, and town hall, free downtown Wi-Fi. This is examples of a wayfinding package. If you were on the CBTA, we approved the Fall Line wayfinding package funding at our last meeting. The Fall Line Trail actually ends, the map's hard to read, but basically where the red dot is where or close to where the Fall Line Trail ends at Carter Park. If you follow the trolley line, it actually takes you up to the heart of the town, which is up at the northern end, about a mile distance. So we want to take advantage of anyone using the Fall Line Trail and attract them to downtown. Tell them where dining, shopping, and entertainment is, as well as other things, libraries, businesses. And so we'll use the Ashland logo for that, but we assume that the Bowl Line Trail will use a similar process, but using the Fall Line Trail logo. So hopefully that's of interest. Another project is the England Street revitalization, which is the next slide. Well, after this slide, this is an example, sorry. All right, catching up. England Street revitalization. That's the main street that basically connects the railroad downtown area to Route 1 and 95. But down near the railroad tracks, we've made some streetscape improvements, and we're going to enhance that using ARPA funds and some local funds as well. It's going to cause a narrowing of the right-of-way to create more pedestrian access and amenities. Another project that we talked about earlier, we have 2 EV stations, one at our town hall parking area and another at the library, which has 4 charging stations. We'll do pretty much anything to get people off of I-95 because our tax base is basically meals and lodging tax. So anytime we can get, yes, ma'am.
If you go back to the other picture,
Yes,
are y'all taking down the electric lines? Is that part of the,
it's too expensive to bury them, so we're relocating
so you relocate?
to another parallel. That's our plan.
Okay.
Good
No, I'm
catch.
just interested in that.
Yes.
Really nice. Okay.
Question. The EV stations, we're partnered with Green Spot, and we use the Center for Innovation to put us in contact with them. And we're hoping that folks will come off 95 and use the time that their vehicles recharging to shop and eat downtown. Next slide. We don't really have a train station in Ashland. It's a train stop. You can get your tickets online and then get on in Ashland. It's a historic, beautiful train station, but it was not handicapped accessible. And we just completed a project in partnership with RRTPO and CSX, with Amtrak paying the most significant part, to add, as you can see, yellow stripes and enhancements to make it the station handicapped accessible. We're very proud of our new town hall. Next slide. And we're building a pavilion in front of town hall in the town hall green. Our old town hall basically outlived its usefulness, and every major system was failing, and it was actually cheaper to build a new town hall than it was to fix the old town hall. That pavilion will be done by the end of the year. We open the town hall in 2021. Where our newest project is free next slide, free downtown Wi-Fi. To orient you, on the left, the area in yellow and orange is the Wi-Fi that we offer. The blue dots, the blue dots on your left is where town hall is located, and then the next feature that you see that looks like a 4-lane highway is actually train tracks running through town. That's the heart of our town, and the orange area being the strongest signal. And then the next blue dot is the Ashland Theater, and the next blue dots, sorry, Sid, not quite done. The next blue dot is the police station. But anyway, did I mention that we want to pull people off the interstate and they can sit and eat and shop and use and have free 5G Wi-Fi. So next slide. We hope you come to town, the center of the universe. This is back into the microbrewery called Origin Beer. And it's a great place to come and relax. Hope you take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. This is great. That last slide reminded me that it's always a good reason to stop in Ashland, but during the holidays, it's a special time to
We're all lit up.
go down
We're
English Street.
gonna have the lighting, light all the buildings, and we get a lot of positive feedback from people on the trains going through town.
So that's-
We're a little unique that everything faces the railroad tracks.
what is the cost and time, if you know the cost and the time frame of the English Street revitalization?
Good question. I don't have staff to, you just checked it because they do. It didn't give me a figure. We've been doing it in phases, and we did the phase along Railroad Avenue. I'm guessing it's in the ballpark of 152 million. Take it from the railroad tracks to the theater, which connects us to Randolph-Macon.
And it's already underway, or it's,
The engineering's underway, construction to start next year.
well, thank you. Thank you so much. I can tell I'm surrounded by a bunch of overachievers with Charles City, Chesterfield, and now Ashland. Thank you all for the presentation. That takes us to the Secretary's report. Work status financial report, Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be brief. On page 17 in your agenda packet is the work status and financial report for September. As you can see, we are on track. We're about a quarter of the way through our funding for most of our work tasks. A couple outliers, tab 7310, which is our long range transportation plan. This is an off year for the LRTP, but we are doing some prep work for the next month, the 2050 long range plan. And that involves development of socioeconomic data. That is just about complete, but the emphasis on that this fall is the reason for the expenditure of funds somewhat ahead of schedule. But we expect the use of funds in that work task to trail off a little bit as we get into the end of this calendar year and move into the next year. But most of the projects, the work tasks that you see in the financial report are about a quarter of the way spent. The other outlier is I'll be providing an update under item B4 on scenario planning and talk a little bit more about that. Mr. Chair, happy to take any questions, but be fairly straightforward.
Members, any questions? All right. Seeing none, we'll dive into new business. First is a tip, VDOT requested tip amendment, and Mr. Bushing will present.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? All right. So this is a tip amendment requested by VDOT. Next slide. So just a little bit of an overview. This amendment would add 2 new projects to the tip. The projects are both of the segments in New Kent County of the I-64 gap. So I'll go into a little bit of the detail on the projects, but just kind of a contextual, why are we adding these projects? The tip is generally a financial document to plan how we're going to obligate federal dollars. In this case, there are no federal dollars being planned, but the tip is also required to include all regionally significant projects and any project that will require federal approval, regardless of the funding source. So that is kind of the origin of why we're adding it in now, even though there's no federal dollars that are pledged. Next slide. So the first project is what's called segment A. This is exit 205 to exit 214. You can see the total cost is just under $278 million. And what's being proposed with this amendment is adding state money in fiscal year 23, $27 million for preliminary engineering. So this would allow VDOT down the road, once the project is fully funded, to start engineering this year, assuming funding all lines up. The next project is, next slide, segment B, which covers exit 214 all the way to exit 227. So that's the actually in the James City County, but this stops essentially at the New Kent County, James City County line. So the cost of this piece is $244 million. Same thing, it's state funding, $23 million in fiscal year 23 to allow this project to start once the full funding package is in place. Next slide. So TAC reviewed this request. We went through a bit of a different review process this time. So this board has adopted guidelines for TIP amendments. The last amendment to that guidance was approved in 2013. So you may not recall the exact details on all of that, but essentially there are two formats. The usual format is TAC reviews it at a TAC meeting. They make a formal recommendation and it comes to the board. The alternative is sort of an expedited review process, and the TAC chair can determine that the amendment can move forward, that it is appropriate. And then it is sent out to all of our TAC members, and it's sort of like a consent agenda. So if we don't receive any objections, it then moves forward to the policy board for approval. So we went through that process this time. We received no objections from our TAC members. We actually had several emails in support of this, these TIP amendments. And so it has moved forward. Next slide. The other piece of this is the staff recommendation. Staff, as you know, has been working through both CVTA and TPO on these projects for years, and we are fully in support of adding them into the TIP at this time. Next slide. So the action requested is two parts. The first is a resolution that adds the two projects to the TIP. And the draft pages are in your agenda packets. The second part notes that these projects are outside of our former ozone maintenance area, so they're not subject to triggering that whole conformity process where we have to do the interagency consultation and do all of those other steps before adding them in. So this is just, usually we put an exemption in here. Since these projects aren't exempt, we're noting that they're outside of the former maintenance area. So that's the request of this board today. I'm happy to answer any questions about the TIP side of it, and Mr. Riblet is prepared to answer any questions about the projects more generally.
Thank you, Mr. Bushing. Thank you, Mr. Ribble, being ready to answer any questions. Any questions, Ms. O'Bannon?
So this means we are agreeing to fund it sometime in the future, some portion of it. That's the tacit part, or that's the indirect part of this.
So the allocation side of funding the project is a separate action. This is acknowledging that there would be state dollars that would potentially be used for PE on the project, and we're recognizing in the TIP that it is a regionally significant project that would be included in the TIP. Correct.
Okay.
There has been a recommendation that the CGB include a smart scale application. They are allowed to submit applications. So there's the TPO application that covers a portion of what is the gap. And we anticipate a CTB smart scale application that would certainly cover the rest, if not encompass the whole thing.
Have any idea what the rest is?
So again, the TPO application only covered a portion of the section of the gap within the TPO area. There's a 29 mile segment that is included, about 2/3 in Richmond District, a third in Hampton Roads. And we would anticipate that through a variety of funding sources, some of which might be smart scale, we're certainly hoping to get that fully funded. This is not an allocation request this morning yet.
It really is an indication we're going to fund it in the future. I mean, indirectly.
That is certainly the hope. Yes, ma'am.
Move for approval, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Hey, Mark.
Mr. Peterson moved for approval, and I got a second from Mr. Atkins. Thank you, but somebody online.
Mr. Rucker.
Mr. Rucker.
Yes, hello, good morning. Hey, Mark, I appreciate your comments. In the long-range transportation plan, how is this project included for funding purposes?
So the first section was included when the LRTP was originally adopted. So I think that went through 214 with segment A.
Okay.
The extra section has been added via amendment. So this board took action a few months ago to amend the long-range transportation plan to add the remainder all the way to the James City County line.
Okay, and the reasonably available source of funds, is it state funds or is it a combination of state or federal or local?
Correct. The reason we were able to amend the LRTP at the time was due to the General Assembly's action this past cycle.
Mr. Chair.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Rucker?
Yeah, so I guess the answer is it's funded in the long range transportation plan by state funds. Is that?
I can answer that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Mr. Rucker, we have somebody here that maybe can field that. Mr. Carroll, you have the floor.
Sure.
Thank
So the General Assembly put aside $470 million in their budget. 320 million, which was in both the House and Senate budget, and 150 million, which was a contingency based on surplus.
Okay,
VDOT put in for $150 million federal grant, and the CBTA put a letter of support forward for $100 million towards the project. There is still some discussion with Hampton Roads Transportation Authority on getting funds from them to fund their end, which is about 9 miles. So that's where we stand with funding that's been allocated to fund the 64 widening project. You get that right?
You got it correct.
All right.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Carroll. Just where are we with, because the segment B only goes out to exit 227, which is the New Kent James City line, correct?
There would be similar requests from Hampton Roads, MPO for, and a similar inclusion in their tip for the remaining segment.
So they're just running a little behind us on the timing of putting it in the tip for that.
I think the request is running concurrently, but this body would simply be asked to act on the section within your area.
Correct. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Roll call vote.
Thank you. Mr. Hodges,
Aye.
Mr. Atkins,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Holland,
Aye.
Chair Hunkins,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon. Aye. Mr. Williams,
All right.
Mr. Addison,
Aye.
Ms. Jordan,
Abstain.
Ms. Adams,
Aye.
Mr. Ridley.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you, board members. Thank you, Mr. Bush. Mr. Gregory is going to lead us on our next item. This was moved from last month, continued to this month. The second part of our virtual public meeting discussion from last month. This is for all virtual public meetings. Mr. Gregory, the floor is yours to walk us through this action item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the body, please see page 29 in your agenda packet. That is the draft policy for all virtual public meetings. You all approved the policy for members to participate by virtual means, which we're exercising today at the last meeting. And you asked for some time to consider this a little bit more fully, and for staff to bring it back, which is what we're doing today. So before you is the policy in draft form for your considered action today. Happy to answer any questions. I ran through it last time. We talked about it at several meetings. The amendments to the FOIA law passed by the General Assembly this past session allowed regional public bodies such as yourself to adopt policies to allow for virtual public meetings. That would be meetings in which all of the members are participating by virtual telecommunications means. So everybody is in a remote location, whether it be their home, their office, or some other location down in Cancun or wherever. They could participate via Zoom or whatever online platform the body may be using, which would facilitate your ongoing handling of the public business of the body. When and if you all decided for the reasons allowed by FOIA to conduct the meeting by virtual telecommunications means. There are limitations. You have to have the policy in place to do that. You have to comply with the policy. You cannot have more than 2 or 25% of your meetings held by this method in any calendar year. You cannot do it back to back. You cannot do more than 2 meetings or can't do 2 meetings in a row by virtual telecommunications means, and other limitations that we've discussed prior in the policy. So That's my presentation. It's all for you for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions if you wish. Yes, sir.
Mr. Peterson.
I wasn't here last month. I apologize. This question may have already been asked, but I noticed in item 1B and item 3A, both have or the Board of Supervisors versus the governor declaring in a state of emergency. Be my suggestion that or the Board of Supervisors be deleted from this. Because with this being the way it is, it sounds like any one jurisdiction could completely declare an emergency and everybody would have to comply with it. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. The mention of the Board of Supervisors, you're correct that should be changed to local governing body. I'm sorry about that. That's a clerical error. And that is to allow, as you know, as a member of a local governing body, the governor can declare a statewide a state of emergency or even a local state of emergency, depending on the area. And local governing bodies can declare states of emergency within their jurisdiction. So that would allow, if for instance, in the city of Richmond would declare a local state of emergency, and a public body meeting within that jurisdiction or could meet by telecommunications means.
Safely we've done right now.
That's correct.
But
But
because
this
we're in
policy,
handover-
this policy does not apply to those circumstances. This policy applies to other circumstances under which the body would meet by telecommunications means, which are outlined in item 3, towards the end of page 1 of 3 or page 29. So if the body determines that it's impractical or unsafe, but a state of emergency has not been declared. For instance, if there's a power outage or a flood or a winter storm or something of that nature, but a state of emergency has not been declared, the body can decide to meet by virtual telecommunications means. Item B, other circumstances for the convenience of all virtual meetings, you may decide to do that if you just can't get a quorum, so you're physically assembled, so you're going to meet by telecommunications means. Item C, it mentions the item that I mentioned before, which is not having more than 2 meetings back to back by virtual telecommunications means. And then, of course, your last meeting, the belt suspenders, your last meeting that you conducted can't be by.
Follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
Is item 3B. This says you can have a virtual meeting just for convenience. That seems to me like it's sort of thumbing the nose of state FOIA laws.
No, this is actually in compliance with state FOIA laws. The state FOIA law specifically allows for that. It's not thumbing its nose or anything. It's actually in compliance with the state FOIA law, the law that was approved by the General Assembly.
I'm so glad you used. That was my point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
So
I'll
thank you,
back back.
thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Should it then read
Ms. Bannon?
local governing body where the location of meetings usually are? I mean, when you're saying the governor or the local governing body, I mean, which, that would indicate to me just what he was saying, which one could any of them?
Well, under 1B, if you'll read along with me, says, this policy shall not govern an electronic meeting conducted to address a state of emergency declared by the governor or the Board of Supervisors. It should say the local governing body. So whichever local governing body. So it doesn't apply in those circumstances. So that's not really a concern. We should make that change.
Mr. Chairman, if I may clarify, Ms. O'Bannon, I heard you say where the local, where the I heard you earlier say where the meetings are usually held. I think it's where the meeting is being held. Right, so that's why when we go back to the city, if the city is still under a state of emergency, the different rules will apply. But we're meeting in Hanover today. Now, I know this is different than the other policy, but I think that the idea is where the meeting, the status, state of emergency or not, where the jurisdiction where the meeting is held, if it's a local declaration.
Right. This policy does not govern where states of emergency have been declared. Okay. if a local state of emergency is declared, a public body, a regional public body, even a local public body, in compliance with FOIA, can opt to meet by virtual telecommunications means under FOIA, not under this policy. This policy is when there is not a state local emergency.
Oh, shall not govern.
Even with the state of local emergency, though, we have the option as to whether we.
Yes, that is
Allow
under,
this
that is
or-
under other provisions of FOIA. So there are basically three categories or buckets of virtual meeting possibilities now. There's the state of emergency bucket, which still exists and exists before, well, as of a couple of years ago. And that's not part of this policy, not affected by this policy or anything. Then there's what we're doing today, which is partial telecommunications, or members can participate by telecommunications means. And then this policy would allow the entire body to meet by telecommunications means if in compliance with FOIA, if warranted, and in compliance with the policy as well. And Mr. Peters, Mr. Parsons corrected me a moment ago. The body could meet more than twice per year via telecommunications means, but it can't do so more than 2 times or more back to back. You can only meet by telecommunications means once, then you would have to meet in person. Then you could meet by telecommunications means again. So the clarification, but I would, consistent with what you said, Mr. Peterson, I would suggest under 1B that you change the phrase Board of Supervisors to local governing body. And I would suggest that you change under item 3A, change Board of Supervisors to the local governing body where the meeting is being held.
Great.
Does everybody understand the proposed 2 edits to the policy we're considering? Are any other questions, for Mr. Gregory? Ms. O'Bannon?
I know you set a policy like this to cover the outline or, the things that might go wrong. So we're not going to be able to figure out every single thing, maybe after it happens. But the notifying or notifies, it says it must be a written notice, but not limited to email or letter, but it does not include text messages. First thing is having been not notified a couple of times, I'm kind of sensitive to this, that I didn't get the email it was sent or whatever. Why not text messaging? Or something. I was just thinking how many ways can possibly notify somebody. But my key here was, is there a response from the person? There's nothing saying that the person said, I got your email. And I know because, and following up with that is, I would be the one probably, or anybody might come then to the meeting, not having been notified it was going to be all virtual. And it says if there are more than 2 members of the TPO together in one location, you can't do virtual. I mean, I can see this as something that, should we have something that they confirm that they received the notice? That's my bottom. That's what they're.
Certainly that would be a good way to comply with the policy, comply with FOIA. I would suggest that the limitation on text messages, it's not saying that you can't notify people by text messages, but the official notice has to be by other means. Text messages, there's not a record, right? Sometimes text messages are ultimately deleted or not accessible. The notice requirements and the provisions in this policy are so that you have a record of that notice, right? An email is more of a more tangible, not tangible, but you have more of a record of that, or more of a full circle communication that can be tracked.
Is there any, well, I guess the question is, this is their policy,
Right.
we could talk about it, but I was hoping to see something about if the person responds, with the response. If you get a quorum and you've got sufficient response to do the all virtual, that's fine too. But what, it seems to me, what do you need to do it? You need to do this fairly in advance, right? I mean, that's the other thing.
That's correct. The body would have to make a decision to have or the chair would work with staff and the body to decide to have the meeting in compliance with this policy.
So it's not like if it snowed on Monday and the meeting's on Thursday, that's not sufficient time to.
Well,
notify
that
the press
it may be sufficient time to provide the notice. It may be.
But I'm just worried that being notified by whatever means. The other thing is, when you say an email, my email goes to an assistant, not to me personally. So this would be one reason I might not get it if it were Monday to Thursday in county. I'm just throwing all these out because I can see where the notification becomes very important because somebody could be trying to, I don't know what, but just thinking this is why you write policies to try to cover everything. So could there be something there that says must be if there must be a quorum response or something? That doesn't have to be individual response. They wouldn't hold a meeting, I assume, if there's a quorum. I'm trying to figure it out. No? See, it is policy, be our policy.
Could provide for that.
Some sort of response. I guess, if, in other words, we don't have a response necessarily now, but if it's a virtual meeting, you would probably want to know in advance if there are going to be enough people online to have a meeting. That's all I'm getting at. That would be the biggest point.
I think there's plenty of practical reasons for staff and chair and anybody planning the meeting to make sure people get a notice. Again, to have a quorum and just, I think it's just pretty much basic right thing to do. So if people don't respond to an email, I would think we have other means to try to, communicate. But do you have a recommendation or suggestion of language change?
That's what I'm getting. What you just said probably is good. That if there is no response, then other means could be used, phoning or something. I'm just trying to get things.
How about if we just change it to email the response requested?
With receipt, with a read receipt request.
Okay, that would be good.
We could put that in there. I would, my only caution would be that the read response may work, it may not. Some people may ignore the email because they already know the meeting is scheduled. They may have gotten word by other means. They may have seen it on the calendar or on the website and said, oh yeah, no problem. And they just ignore the email. So I think that's going to create problems for the body going forward. If you adopt this policy, you're going to realize that that is a burden on compliance for yourself that you're imposing upon yourself, because it's going to make it that much more difficult to hold the meetings.
So I think, let me just say, what I was thinking, the language was with an email sent with a read request receipt. That doesn't mean that you have to get a reply, because people will often, when if you have your email client might say, this person has requested a read receipt. Do you want to send it? And you can say no and block it. So I agree with you that we do not want to be dependent on getting those read receipts back. But I think it would be, if it's just that it's sent with that request, then that would be a mechanism to help. Hey, we haven't gotten a read receipt from someone. Let's text them or call them. I think it would be a tool to help, but I don't think if we write it correctly, I don't think it would be, oh, we didn't hear from them, so we have to assume they didn't get notice. It's just simply that the read receipt request is sent as part of the outgoing email. I'm trying to address,
No, I
take
agree.
that step towards ensuring or helping to ensure that the communication is. Because then if you don't get a read receipt request, then ideally we would say, hey, we didn't hear back from Ms. O'Bannon, somebody call it. Would that address your concern?
Yes.
Email
I
sent
think
with-
it would be, yes, I like the idea of that
Are you,
because, yeah.
is that in the form of a motion that we add
Yes.
and
Do we need
email
a-
sent with a read receipt request?
Yes.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to add, well, we have, everybody understands we changed Board of Supervisors to local governing body, and then in part 3A, local governing body where the meeting is held. Now there's a motion on the floor to amend the 2E where it says email, sent with a read. How is it read receipt request? All right, is there a second? Sorry. Did you second it? Okay, Mr. Peterson seconded it.
Mr. Chairman, does the motion to amend include the prior amendments which I requested as well?
Do you want to clarify that the motion to amend includes the Board of Supervisors to local governing body as described? Okay, so that's the motion to amend, and that's been seconded. Any discussion?
Sure.
Yes, Mr.
I just wanted to remind the board that we've got almost 2 years of practice hosting virtual meetings, and regardless of what the actual language is, we will make sure that members are notified and are aware that meetings are happening and do everything we can to follow up, no matter what the meeting. I just wanted to reassure everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Certainly. It's in our interest. All right, any other discussion? All right, this before us.
Oh, there was one question.
Okay, Ms. O'Bannon, one more question.
The policy shall be applied strictly and uniformly without exception to the entire membership. This is stated very last time, without regard to matters that will be considered and voted on. I think I know the answer. But what happens if someone is left out and something is voted on? I assume we just bring it up at the next meeting. I'm assuming that that's what could happen. I mean, I'm just, we're talking about it all virtual, so it's starting from scratch because you have to pay attention. You're the person doing the vote. You have to really, you can't just come. Right, you have to have electricity. I know we've had virtual. Someone is left out.
What's the question?
Someone is left out. It says strict and uniform application of policy. If you left out, they can bring it up in the future. I don't think this is going to require it.
Maybe that's more of a question for the lawyer. If we don't follow the policy, what are the consequences? I suppose is the question.
If the body is not compliant with the policy, which then would mean the body is not in compliance with the there's no consequence for that. And courts have held that actions taken by public bodies at meetings that may not necessarily in every respect be in compliance with FOIA are still effective. So I didn't exactly understand the question, but I think to address the item 8 in the policy, that is to make sure that the policy is applied as described, that it's applied without for purposes that are not untoward or say politically motivated, that that the meeting is not being held to game the system, if you will, to try to gain some political advantage in the decision-making process. That's why that provision is there.
If I can explain why I have a concern. The Board of Supervisors Air Board of Supervisors in Henrico establishes their meetings in January. The General Assembly passed some legislation this year that says and it's not clear. That's where the problem is, I think. That's why I think it's not going to be solved, it just changes the language. If you have a meeting and vote on things on election day, since it's a state holiday, it may or may not be legal having done that business on election day. So we had set up to have our board meeting on November 8th before the legislation passed. And with that said, we've changed it to the 9th because it was unclear whether if we voted on zoning cases on that day or pearls or whatever, it may or may not be legal. We might end up in court if say a zoning case was iffy or the applicant didn't like it. So we moved their date insufficient time. So if a person, in that case, we had actually moved their date for the meeting. To make sure there would be no question of anything that was done on election day, even though the county is open because we're running the election. Okay, with that said, I was just wondering what kind of recourse is there for somebody who's, you know, who feels they've been, you know, that their item didn't get passed or something at a meeting. I assume it's at the next meeting. Any provision for if it's, okay, I'm getting too deep on this, aren't I? Okay, but I'm just telling you, that was what I was thinking. If we vote on something at a virtual meeting, it might come back, but this is just policy. This is not a law, so
Policy, and there's a motion in the second one for any other discussion.
just for that, the 2 minutes, the 3 minutes.
Yeah, we'll do, the motion was just to make those 2 amendments to the policy, and then if depending, well, let's take care of that motion first. All in favor of the proposed amendments to the policy, say aye.
Aye.
Think we can do the amendments by voice vote? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, now we have before us an amended policy. Chair will entertain a motion to adopt the policy. Ms. O'Bannon and Mr. Carroll with the second. Thank you all. Any discussion? Mr. Carroll.
Just to speak to the question that was raised, I would say that, and I think legal counsel can correct me if I'm wrong, but any issue that's brought up that's voted on can be brought back up if you voted on the prevailing side in a future meeting. So all it would require is a request of someone who voted on the prevailing side to bring it back up for reconsideration.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that right, Mr. Legal? All right.
Okay. So roll call vote on this, on the motion to adopt the policy as amended.
Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mr. Atkins.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Mr. Winslow.
He looks like he left us.
Okay. Chair Lumpkins.
Aye.
Vice Chair Peterson.
Aye.
Ms. O'Bannon. Aye. Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Ms. Jordan.
Aye.
Ms. Adams. Mr. Ridley.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Motion carries. Okay, we now have an all virtual public meeting policy. Thank you all. Good discussion. GRTC microtransit study. We've been looking forward to this. Ms. Torres is with us in person. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes. Yes, they're gonna share their presentation. Yeah. They should be all. Nick and everyone.
70s.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. We are going to be providing an update on our microtransit study and next steps in this effort. I have with me Alana from Foursquare and Nick Britton from Michael Baker International, and they're the 2 consultant groups that have been working with us through this effort. So I was going to kind of kick it off. We started this effort after the approval of the CBTA funds for FY, I think it was 22, to do a phase 1 study effort to work with the jurisdictions through the TPO, kind of come up with some pilot zones and identify some future efforts as well. So we have been through this a year and actually at the point where we want to do a phase 2 study as far as implementation, but want to catch you guys up as well as get your input as we move into the phase 2 effort. So with that, I'm going to hand it over actually to Nick.
All right, thank you. Real quick, just to look at what we're going to go over. We're just going to talk a little bit about what microtransit is to help with some education on the service, since it's something new for the Richmond area. We'll talk about the study and the steps we've taken so far with outreach and stakeholder engagement. And then I will pass it to Alana, who will discuss what the findings were of the study, some of the recommendations, and then finally what next steps we're going to be taking with GRTC to get this possibly implemented. So just real quickly about what microtransit is, and let me know if you have any questions, but I think the easiest way and the way I try to explain it is that it's similar to what Uber and Lyft is. It is a technology-based system. So if you need a ride on Uber or Lyft, for example, you would use your phone to call a rider, and it would schedule something in the next X number of minutes and pick you up. Microtransit is very similar, except that it is branded as public transportation, which means that you're not really guaranteed like a solo trip. It's not an individual trip that you might get on Uber or Lyft. And it's also open to the general public. So there are no conditions or regulations as far as you could use it. Similar to paratransit is a similar type of service, but there's age or disability requirements. In this case, there are none. So there are options for riders that don't have smartphones. So it's not just based on technology only, but there are call centers that could handle those residents and riders who don't have phones. And then finally, in terms of fares, it'll be probably more affordable than you would see at Uber or Lyft, but we don't have exact costs on fares. But typically what you'll see across in other places with microtransit, it's similar to or just slightly above what you would get with fixed route transit. So it's not, again, it's similar to Uber and Lyft, but there are some differences that you would want to keep in mind. So microtransit is a fairly new type of or a new method of public transportation where it does recognize that there are people out there who do need mobility options, who may not have cars at home, maybe low income, things like that. And what this does is it provides transit in areas where fixed route might not be the best option. So fixed route makes a lot of sense in urban areas because there's a lot of density, both employment density and residential density. So you have a lot of people living in smaller areas, but when you get out to more suburban development, things like that, you still have riders who need public transit. However, there might not be that density to support a single fixed route. So this is for that option for filling that need. You do have to keep vehicles going, so the service will be continuing on use. So you have to have a certain number of vehicles to always be available for rides when they're requested. There are ways to schedule services in advance. Paratransit is a similar service now that does that, where you schedule 24 hours in advance. Again, this allows for a lot more flexibility in that scheduling, but you do want to keep in mind that there are a certain number of vehicles needed to kind of keep the system efficient and kind of always running. And then finally, one of the things that microtransit is pretty popular for, and one of the reasons why a lot of agencies have been moving in this direction across the country, is because it's very flexible and customizable. There are smaller vehicles than you would see on fixed route. Usually you'd see on fixed route buses. We're not talking about 40-foot, 45-foot buses. We're talking about smaller van-like buses, something similar to what you see in that drawing up there. And just as an example, or a couple examples in the Commonwealth of Virginia that have adopted microtransit, Bay Transit, which is the agency for the communities out on the Northern Neck and the peninsula, they have a microtransit service in Gloucester County in the Gloucester Courthouse area. And then Wise County and Norton and the city of Norton have adopted a microtransit service out there. So it does work well in rural areas. Like I said, it doesn't, it can work in any service areas, but that rural kind of suburban rural area might be a place where it seems to thrive. So this, we started the study about a year ago. The goal was to really look at the entire region, so all 9 jurisdictions in the TPO, and determine where microtransit might be either both feasible and beneficial. And then again, what the parameters of those different services would be. And again, you can have different areas. It doesn't have to be citywide or countywide. It can be in subsets of those jurisdictions. So each of those different areas or zones, I think is the best way to put it, could have different rules, different hours, things like that. So it just depends kind of on what works best in that particular area and what makes it a little bit more efficient and feasible. We went through public engagement through a public survey. We did a significant number of interviews and meetings with the jurisdictions, all 9 of them. We did talk to providers in the area, including Bay Transit, who does run microtransit, like I mentioned. And we worked with other stakeholders to kind of get an idea of how this would be viewed, how it would be received, and kind of how the different stakeholders, jurisdictions thought that it could play into the mobility needs of each of their communities. We did a quantitative analysis looking at the market, so that's ridership potential, the transit propensity population, so people that might be more likely to use transit than others, and then looked at travel patterns across the region, back and forth between counties and inside counties. And then we looked at literature and best practices of different agencies of similar sizes and context as Richmond to see what works and what has not worked in those areas. And what we found through the public survey especially was that there was a lot of interest in microtransit. It's something new and it's something different. I think that sometimes that's a little daunting in terms of adoption, but over a third of the people that were interviewed in the survey did indicate that they would use it at least once a week. However, that's all dependent upon the reliability of the service. So again, how fast is it coming and how easy is it to schedule? And then the cost of the service, which we don't have a number for yet. However, that cost was identified up to $6 as kind of that limit for 80% of the people, and a wait of about 20 minutes. So again, much cheaper than Uber or Lyft, a similar type of service, but again, this is public transit, and so you have a similar type of wait. And then finally, most people did say they were more comfortable with app-based booking, but as usual, I mean, as I mentioned, you would have opportunities for people who do not have phones or that technology access to book a call. So it wouldn't be restrictive in that sense. And we talked to Access Chesterfield, Bay Transit, GRTC Care Service, and Hanover Dash to talk about some of the similar type of services, even though some of those are paratransit specific. They do have, you call in and schedule. So we talked a lot about what needs they've seen. And then we met with the jurisdictions, all 9 of them, to talk about the study, talk about the different areas that we identified in the analysis, and get some feedback on what those areas, how to prioritize those areas, or what would make certain areas better than others. We've been to the Public Transportation Working Group for the RRTPO a couple times now, and we've also met with the board multiple times throughout the project, briefing them on progress and kind of next steps each time as we move forward with this. So at this point, I will turn it over to Alana to talk about the more technical details and some of the recommendations that we have.
Great, thank you, Nick, and good morning, everyone. So on the technical side, we did some analyses to identify, starting off by identifying the locations in the region where we see the appropriate conditions for microtransit. So that, again, relates to where the people are who would use the service, where they're trying to get to, things like that, and when they're traveling. And as we were doing this, we're also thinking about the fact that there can be different use cases for the service. So in some cases, it might be intended to get just people to the local grocery store, local destinations. In other cases, people might be using it to connect to a fixed route that they can then take to other parts of the region. So those are some of the data points that we look at in trying to figure out where the service makes the most sense to offer. So again, like Nick said, we had a mixture of qualitative research to identify these locations in the region based on the input from the jurisdictions. And the input from the peer agency interviews told us things like, how big the zone should be to be a productive and effective service. And then again, like Nick said, we pulled a lot of data on where there's low-income people, zero-car households, people with disabilities, where they're trying to get to, and things like that. So the map you see on the slide there, the dark purple are the locations that our more data-driven analysis showed that microtransit could be really suitable. So just in a little more detail, the steps we took. So we first did that data-driven analysis to identify locations where we thought that might be suitable. And we held those meetings with each jurisdiction and they told us really helpful things like there's going to be a development going in this place. You should think about, adding this part to the area. So got some great input there. Then we actually started drawing where zones could be. And so we came up with a list of about 30 different places in the region we thought could be potentially suitable for microtransit. And that's when we held our first meeting with the working group, and they gave us some really great input on which areas they thought would be most appropriate, which zones. So based on that, we narrowed it down to a list of about 10 top candidate zones. And then for each zone, we used some models that we have to identify how many vehicles would be required to serve the demand in that area and what the cost would be to have all those vehicles operating. Based on that, then we made some more refined boundary adjustments and did a kind of data-driven analysis to prioritize which ones kind of rose to the top in terms of all the indicators we look at for effective service. And then we met with the working group to actually discuss each zone's readiness for implementation. And based on that, we've come up with a list of 5 proposed zones to be pilots. And so I'm going to go ahead and show these on the screen here. So I mentioned that we had a discussion about readiness. So this is where we said, okay, all these locations in the region could potentially be very successful places for microtransit to operate. But we want to think about things like, where has there been a recognized need in the community for transportation service that's not currently being met or is kind of under met today, where there's political support for that service, and where the resources are there to market and educate people about how to use the service, because if people don't know about it, it's not going to be a super effective service. So based on some of those discussions we've identified the areas shown on the map in blue. We have 5 zones, and they're throughout the region. So we have one in Henrico County there, that Washington Park, Azalea Avenue, bordering on kind of close to Mechanicsville area there. That's one of our zones. We've got the town of Ashland, which we heard a lot about today, as an area that we felt was really ripe for this type of service. We have a zone in Powhatan here. And then we saw 3 zones in Chesterfield we thought would really be suitable. And we've identified North Chesterfield West here as kind of the one that would make most sense to pilot first. And then we have this one over here that touches on parts of New Kent and Henrico County. So the cost to implement all 5 of those zones as pilots, and we looked at different service models. So some of these we would recommend that GRTC, based on the resources and knowledge it has, operate directly, and others we would consider more appropriate for a service that would be contracted out, competitively bid, of course. And the cost that we estimate to operate these 5 pilot zones in terms of operating would be between $1.5 and $3.1 million per year. It's a wide range because, as Nick mentioned, it's a very flexible mode. And so we have an estimate of how many vehicles we think would be required, but there's always things that we can't predict. So sometimes the demand is higher than we thought it would be, sometimes it's lower. And so we have that flexibility to add more vehicles to meet the demand and keep those wait times reasonable for riders. So these are our recommendations. Just a little bit more detail about each of those zones is shown here, and kind of the information we heard on readiness and who and where each zone would serve is shown here. So we've again got those 5 zones listed on the left. We've indicated which one we recommend for a third party to operate just based on efficiency versus GRTC. And then we have a wide cost range for each, again, because there's still unknowns about how much demand there would be. And we want to, obviously offer the right amount of service to be a good investment of resources. So our next steps, we are going to be doing an update to the CVTA as well. And then, as Adrian mentioned, we'll be beginning a phase 2 study. And so we'll take those pilot zones we've identified and study, like on the ground, what are the conditions we need to take into account, and make sure the technology is kind of lining up. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into that. So just ensuring we can have a really smooth implementation of those pilots. And that will necessarily, of course, involve coordination with partners to, especially for that marketing and education component I mentioned. And then, of course, we need to kind of finalize the funding, and then we'll move toward launch in FY24. So that's a quick summary there. Happy to take any questions.
And just to highlight the funding, we have identified potentially using ARPA funds to do the pilot, so not even utilizing CBTA as we determine what is successful, and looking at how to get the other jurisdictions that identified future 1 to 3 years or 3 to 5 years, getting them ready. As well as we have applied for the mid-cycle trip program. And all 5 jurisdictions have given us support letters as well as Plan RVA, so appreciate that. So we'll find out if we get that as well, and plan to use the ARPA funds as leverage so that we can make this sustainable as we go through this endeavor. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Torres, Mr. Britton, and Ms. McKeon. I'm sure we do have some questions. So, Mr. Williams.
Several questions. One of the things that I've learned, you know, by rural transportation is that there's no one system that works and serves any locality. Now, today, what you see is over in Hanover County, you have Dash, and they're providing that through DRPT, the 5310 disadvantage funding. Something that's available to all of us, something that I'm trying to bring to Powhatan County, using those funds to create something analogous to what they've created in Hanover County. Down in New County, you got Bay Transit. Again, they have a transportation system down there. So where I'm going with this, and I'm not sure this was a study, I'll be somewhat questioning that, because I read what the consultant did over in Hanover County, and they actually went in and they identified where the people were that needed what type of trips, going to what places, actually in the county and the other side of the county. They had that information when they set this up. And from my understanding, they also folded in existing alternative transportation, ridership, you know, through other entities. But again, no one system in a rural transportation area serves all of the needs in that locality. And what you've identified there, I can't really know in Powhatan County. I'm not sure how you came up with that pilot area. Okay, because let me finish. I'll give you a chance because I got many more questions. The whole county as a whole, we have volunteer ridership right now through, you know, a program that we've set up with volunteers. Now, my question is, why would I, for my 15% that I'm sending to GRTC as part of CBTA, why would I send that to GRTC in Powhatan County as opposed to looking at using this money? And this has been a discussion before. I know Charles City has discussed it. Mr. Atkins' predecessor even pointed out they don't even have a stoplight in Charles City. Why wouldn't we be better served using those monies in our localities to do things like Hanover has done with the Transportation Disadvantage Funds with the 5310 and customizing transportation for our purposes in the county, as opposed to depending on GRT to develop something in a specialized area that may not be applicable to the whole county. Because I can tell you that one pilot area is not going to be representative of the needs of the county. It's not going to happen. It can't. So my question is, now we're into this thing, the 4th year, just getting around to doing a pilot. Okay, and then it's only going to be for a specific area, for example, in Powhatan County. Again, why am I better served going this approach with the 15% to GRTC versus having that money is available to be able to use and customize my own transportation program like it's been done in Hanover County. So tell me why I'm better off going the way that you're proposing, if you will.
Sure, I'll first address the zones themselves. Alana, would you mind sharing just the zone slide? As I kind of talk through it. We did have two scenarios in the cost, and it was whole Powhatan County, and that was for all the rurals or a specific zone. And working with the staff members there, identifying where are people going today. So they did do a full traffic analysis study determining on patterns. Do you have the one at the bottom that's hidden that just shows the actual, yeah, let's just do that.
Could I get a copy of the presentation?
Absolutely. So this gives some of the data that we didn't want to bring, but what is added as appendices to it. But this shows what people are doing today. So it shows the current travel patterns that you see typically in Powhatan in this particular area. We do have another one. They looked at the whole Powhatan jurisdiction as a whole, and then the service span actually matches what the trips are doing today, and they have all the activity centers. So this one as a case study would be new service or a neighborhood circulation, and kind of hits the activity centers that go with it. Now, the benefit of microtransit is that it is very flexible. So let's say that this zone is not like it doesn't exist today. So we don't know if this even going to utilize the way that we're determining it. We could then expand it once we realize there's a neighborhood out here that is actually users who are not incorporated. It can be extended for that purpose. This is just to start it off. As far as the funds, we don't know if it's going to be successful. That is why we do not want to start off with the CBTA dollars. Starting off with the COVID relief dollars, as well as the regional dollars for the trip is the effort. And as far as we did talk to Bay Transit to see what they do. We talked to Dash as well, and we understand the 5310 efforts too, and want to work with the jurisdictions on being able to use those through applications as well.
I would like to see if you could provide me with where you got the information that substantiates the trips, where the trips are coming from in the county. I'd like to see where the etiology or the source of where they came from. Okay. But my question is still the same. We're going to be waiting until 2024 for a pilot project in Powhatan County that's going to focus on a small area of the county, an area that's more suburban than the rest of the county. And I understand the purposes of microtransportation. My question is, again, do we not have better flexibility making those determinations in the rural county ourselves with how we want to use funds that are available to us, for example, the 5310 funds, to develop something analogous to what Hanover has done with the DASH program, or what's being done down in New Kent County, or Charles City County, where they contract with Bay Transit. We're working with Senior Connections right now, looking for a contract provider for transportation. Again, that's something else that's going to be folded in to transportation solution for Powhatan County. So what I'm looking for is something that's going to distinguish what I can already do and I'm looking to do from the 15% that I'm sending to GRTC, waiting for something to happen with microtransportation that already is happening in the other localities. And, for example, the counties I just mentioned that I'm trying to cobble together for Powhatan County today. That's the question. What is it that I'm looking for from GRTC that I can't get that these other localities are already doing that I want to do in Powhatan County?
I do want to just, state that the CBTA funds, the majority, let's say 28 million was this last year, and 22 million does go towards our operating of just our current service as is. So we are looking at this as far as expansion effort once we determine it's sustainable for those additional funds. But the majority of the funds do go towards operating our service as is today. So we look at it as a regional effort. So if that is prioritized through the various bodies, then we can look at those efforts as well, but I know all the other ones you listed do not operate through GRTC today, as you mentioned.
I know they don't. That's my point. They don't operate. And the question was raised, I believe, by one of the representatives of the rural county. Why wouldn't we be better served being able to take the money that we're sending to GRTC to be able to contract out with a Bay Transit? This is not, I'm sorry, this is not a big issue. I know.
No, I know, it's just been a conversation that's been repeated.
I'm saying it's more for, you know, the folks sitting around the table. So this is not a big issue, please. So I just want to make
Anybody else? Mr. Peterson?
Yes, sir. I will mention something that I think that's very important, Mr. Williams, though, is Hanover County, it's not just used 5310, but we put a lot of money into it as well. But we are dealing with paratransit. So I think part of the question is microtransit and paratransit. A 45-year-old healthy male or female in Hanover County cannot use Hanover County. Have to be age or disability qualified. So I think there's a difference. Microtransit has no qualifications. Anybody can use.
Well, the 5310 funds is transportation disadvantage. Right. It's not just for people with disabilities. Yes. Okay. So you made that choice. All I'm saying is I want the ability to make the choices with my money in Powhatan County.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments? Mr. Hodges?
Appreciate Mr. Williams' comments. Ashland's thrilled with potential opportunity to have microtransit. Love to have service. Well, and that might be a good example of how GRTC might complement the DASH program. Thank you.
John, you know, I can readily see where you would, you know, benefit, you know, with the urban, suburban, you know, setting that you have. I'm a different animal.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mr.
No, you're, thank you. I might piggyback on that and just ask a question. I like to go last, and certainly anybody else, please chime in, but let me piggyback on that a little bit, because I'm out in Goochland and I'm hearing similar thoughts and concerns. In Mr. Britton's presentation, he said, I think it said very rural areas or highly rural areas, pre-scheduled service is more likely to work. Are our rural areas, the Powhatans, the New Kents, the Charles Cities, Goochland in this region, are they very rural in your definition? In other words, do they meet the definition of very rural, where you're inclined to look at pre-scheduled for those areas?
Alana, can you address as far as, I guess, the specific ones and which ones?
I think there's a lot of variation within each county. So there's portions where microtransit can operate anywhere, but you know, we want to offer the service that makes sense for the people who live there and is going to be a good use of resources. So there's variation, I think, is the short answer. To the larger point, you know, we do recognize there's many different populations with different transportation needs. And so the way I see microtransit's really kind of like one tool in the toolbox. So I think it can meet an unmet need, but it's not to imply there aren't other transportation services there. So I don't know if hope that answered the question a little bit.
I think he's more so asking about the supply versus the demand. So for example, using Goochland, them being actually a little bit more in the urban area, would they have to they have to schedule their trip 24 hours in advance? For example, I know we talked about that. It's kind of the more rural areas of like Charles City, more specialized transportation model. Which jurisdiction, I guess, which zone areas do you see?
Let me before Ms. McKean, before you answer that, let me kind of supplement that with my other question was, when I look at that Goochland, that portion of Goochland, and then the part New Kent, Henrico, and then the Powhatan looks like courthouse area. When I look at those areas, are you all looking at intra area transportation? Like I'm in Powhatan courthouse, and I need to get to the other end of the courthouse, because I'm imagining folks that would utilize this, persons that would utilize this, or at least here's my anecdotal sense is in Goochland, in that western part of Goochland, people are needing to get to a doctor's office in the West End. So transportation would move, you know, not intra-zone. But is this limited to intra-zone? Or are you looking at Powhatan? If somebody wants to go to the city, you're connecting to the GRTC system.
It really depends on if you have an overlap. This one doesn't show our system, but for example, like the Henrico one, I think overlaps with some of the current fixed route. That would be defined as connecting to our system as well as intra, but the majority of them are intra. It's within that
So
specific
you're looking
zone.
at intra-zone.
Yeah.
Okay, that helps. Then that kind of takes away from my question about my earlier question. Do you consider it very rural? I get that the usage will dictate that.
Right, and then as far as what I was saying about supply, I mean, we mentioned kind of like the more rural southern areas that the demand, that supply itself may be more limited as far as putting a contractor out there. It depends on the resources and the amount of operators we could get. I would say there would be more just because you are closer kind of in than some of the other ones.
So last question, kind of two questions packaged in one. In the beginning, I think you one of the slides talked about prices aren't set yet to be determined. Then you talked about cost. Right there, it's right there on that slide right there, 1.56 to 3.15. Is that cost without counting any receipts for payment?
It is. That would be full cost.
So then my second part of that is, you talked a moment ago, you said, we don't know if these will be quote successful. How are you going to define or measure successful?
Also not in this presentation, but they do have presented some service standards, and through the effort, we would also, the phase 2, go through and setting specific ones. I would say as far as success, and like something that's in a more rural area is not going to be compared to something that's, let's use Powhatan, for example. They wouldn't be compared because we would assume that there would be less riders in Powhatan, but it's still a lifeline for that particular jurisdiction. That in itself would be successful, for there to be standards set like that.
Well, I would just offer that I hope maybe you'll consider success. Is it revenue generating? How much does it cost? What burden is it? Obviously, level of service as a driver, but if you're looking at a cost and you haven't set a price, I think you need to figure that out before you can really start talking about success.
And I think that's what the cost per hour shows, but I would say one would be more cost burden opposed to one where if you're getting revenue from riders because density increases, it's going to be less, but they're just not apples to apples.
Ms. O'Bannon.
I just have a real basic question because the cost range is pretty wide. Does it count from where the GRTC headquarters are and they have to drive out to Powhatan or wherever? I mean, is that going to be covered with that amount? I'm trying to think of how.
So the reason, so I guess the answer to the second part, no, that's why they're recommending a third party operate kind of a turnkey model for those that are not near the GRTC core. So it wouldn't have any deadhead just to get there.
Yeah,
so that would save dollars in that effort.
Okay.
Correct. So they would be operated just within those jurisdictions specifically. And there could be opportunities for additional funds outside of that in terms of operating.
So when you say contracting, you mean like a taxi company or something?
No, so for example, Bay Transit uses VIA, I believe, to operate their service. And that could be, we could work with Bay Transit as well as ones that are near them so that it could still be part of that effort, but similar to that.
So what Mr. Williams, I was thinking Mr. Williams was asking that to see where he can cut costs and use money most effectively, right? I mean, that's what you.
Where I was going
That's what
was,
I'm
yes, ma'am, you're exactly right. I was looking at that as well as, John's questions. But to the point, I can contract with a transportation provider to provide the service, okay? I don't need to go through GRTC to do that contract. As I talked about earlier, we're working with Senior Connections just to bring about such an arrangement. I mean, it's already happening in Charles City where they're contracting with Bay Transit. So the question is, why do I need to send money to GRTC, contract through GRTC to do something that I can do as a locality that's already being done in some of the other rural counties?
I think we hear you, Mr. Williams.
I'll dumb you up.
No, any other questions? We have a few items on the agenda and we'll make some adjustments so we're not here too much longer.
Mr. Chair, hey.
Ms. McKeon and Mr. Britton, thank you all. And are Ms. McKeon and Mr. Britton, are they with the consulting group? Are they both with the consulting?
Yes.
And that consulting group name is
Ms. McKeon is with Foursquare and Nick is with Michael Baker.
Okay, good. Well, thank you all of you for participation. And on behalf of all of us, thank you. You all have been very intentional about looking at the rural areas. And so I think on behalf of all of us, we appreciate the broad regional approach to this. That question of, for the rural jurisdictions that don't yet have GRTC service, that 15% is always going to be a discussion. But this is a good, we appreciate, this is a good step, and we appreciate the very intentional inclusion of, the broad region. See where it goes, but obviously a lot of work. Thank you. And we look forward to continued discussion.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm we've done it before, so I think we can do it again. Kick the scenario planning update to next month. That takes us to the added item. And when I spoke earlier, I sort of connected Mr. Williams' addition. I connected it to the scenario planning update. And that maybe in a lot of minds that wasn't fair. What's the rationale to connecting it? And I guess I'm connecting from a couple of aspects. Staff is busy, TPO staff is very busy. And if they're going, my thought is if they're going to, spending time on scenario planning, is it perhaps, I think to Mr. Williams, and I've had other members ask about this, is maybe a higher, from the policy board's perspective, is maybe a higher priority for staff to take some time and look at these different costs. So that's one aspect that I made the connection. And the other connection is, and maybe we'll find out that it's less of one, but I know I've asked Mr. Parsons when we get to scenario planning update to give us the inputs. What are the scenarios they're contemplating in the scenario planning? And obviously to me, one of the scenarios is the rapid increasing costs of transportation projects. So that's the connection I made, but maybe it's not totally fair. Mr. Parsons and I did talk about this just in our pre-meetings, and I told him that I've heard from board members and that I wanted to talk a little bit more about what the ask was. Well, Mr. Williams wants to know what's been done, and I think I have some specific questions on what the ask is. What can the TPO, perhaps working with VDOT, what can they do efficiently, effectively to help us get further down this path of getting a handle on at what point in these stages are these projects, coming back like, whoa, this is a lot more than we thought originally. So I think that's a little background with Mr. Parsons. I hope you can address this item or get us started on that path.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and it's a very complex topic. It's something that I think everyone is trying to understand at this time. I did want to lay a couple initial thoughts and remarks. Our staff at the TPO is not equipped to do cost estimates, so we don't carry those out ourselves. We depend a lot on our partners around the table at each of our 9 jurisdictions, as well as VDOT, the RRTPO, and other folks that do have the capabilities of figuring out what those cost estimates are going to be. With that said, we are keenly aware of the issues that are at hand around the region, not just our region, but all over the country. And we have heard loud and clear from the policy board about a year ago that this is a priority to start to come to an understanding. So I'm not going to say that we haven't focused on it. We have started to build that awareness into all of our different processes. The origins of cost overruns, and I'm going to ask Miles to speak a little bit about what staff is doing, but I may also cede some time to Mr. Riblett to talk about the VDOT side of things. As we at the TPO, as we consider some of our sub-allocated funds like RSCP and CMAQ, those do depend on estimates, but historically we have not had a standard for what those estimates should include or how they should be reached. So we are now starting to come to terms with that, with some assistance and some alignment with new VDOT practices. We have had cases in the past where projects have been selected for funding that were more planning or conceptual level in terms of preparedness, which ultimately led to scope changes and cost increases down the road. That's been a fairly standard practice because projects need to get in the pipeline and to work with the different abilities and support that each of our 9 jurisdictions have. That has been a practice that has taken place at some points or others. I do think that as we look to the latest round of cost increases, which seem to be happening very regularly, we continue to work with TAC on alternatives to TPO funding as those overruns occur. And we are going to continue to work with localities to understand the origins of any deficits that are identified and alternatives to move forward. I think one interesting note on the CBTA side, since its inception, we have been aware, especially at the TAC level, of cost overruns and estimates that don't match. So part of the process has been to build in to the regional funding application cycle a third-party cost estimate to verify that the cost estimates that are submitted are reasonable and meet the standards. Even though we did that this past year, some of the costs of those 30 projects that were deemed reasonable at the time have increased beyond the expectations of anybody that's been at the table. So there is still work to be done, and we're going to continue to do that. If it's okay, before we get to questions, I'd like Miles to address some of the particular things that our staff has been looking at.
Absolutely, Miles. Mr. Bushy.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a few things we've been doing at the staff level. This summer, we had an intern and we put them to good use to compile the history of every active project that we have. So every application that's been submitted to the TPO for each of those projects. So we could see what was the estimate at the time, how much TPO funding was awarded, essentially tracking those histories so that when we come back to you in the spring and say this project has a request, we can tell you, well, this is where we started, here's where we're at now. These are the changes that have been made over time. So that's kind of the information I think that this board needs in making those decisions. So I think that will help on some of that front. The other piece that we're doing, as Mr. Parsons mentioned, we have started requiring the cost estimate workbooks for our RRTPO CMAQ. So that's the new VDOT standardized estimating process. It is risk-based, so it's intended to capture the unknowns in those cost estimates and better define what we know and what we don't know. And the intent of is obviously to reduce cost overruns. This is completely new for the state. There hasn't been a statewide standardized practice until last year. It's a new office at VDOT. So we're trying to coordinate as closely as possible. As I've mentioned to this board before, we also have VDOT review all the estimates. So VDOT is our third-party reviewer for all the applications that come in. And when projects are going to be administered by VDOT, ultimately VDOT has the decision-making power in terms of what that estimate is going to be if we fund the project. So we're trying to align as much as possible with VDOT practice on the estimates to ensure that we are capturing that risk. VDOT has a great track record in terms of the risk, not so much the TPO in terms of what our projects have done for overruns recently. So we're trying to follow their lead in that direction. Some of the other stuff that we're doing right now is meeting with all the localities. I think Jeff mentioned this briefly, but sitting down for each of the estimates that come in. We've been doing this, but what we're doing this year is trying to understand what the needs are, which ones are inflation based and which ones are scope creep based, and trying to tease out those differences so that when we bring it to the board, we can say, this would be a reasonable amount based on the inflation side of things. This is what's other, and then the board has more information. So a lot of what we're trying to do is provide you all with better information. Just putting together everything that we have. If it's of interest to anyone, we can provide those tracking records for all the projects. We can bring that before the board next month and present it, and then you can have it. And I don't know how many pages the Excel spreadsheet is, but it's just a long catalog of all the estimates and the funding that we've put together from our records. So.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I think that would be of interest, particularly if it shows, the stages along the way that the changes occurred would be at the boundary of changes. In the interest of time, I want to make sure, Mr. Ribley, can you add
Miles did a great job pointing out the fact that the Commonwealth has put together a statewide cost estimating office. It was a very important initiative by our chief engineer. That office has done a good job at offering training, both internal to VDOT staff as well as to locality partners and MPO partners, and folks from your jurisdictions and the MPO have participated in that. We really appreciate that we've had the opportunity to do that. It is risk-based. We're trying to use the tools and have best practices available so that we can be as successful as possible in having good estimates that can be relied on. Miles also noted that recent inflation impacts certainly are sometimes a little bit harder to predict. So there's been an effort by the cost estimating office to try and work with how we need to adjust allocations and estimates accordingly. If there aren't opportunities to reduce scope to be able to work within the existing budget. Little preview to our agency update, the 6-year plan was updated at the last CTB meeting and did provide some allocation adjustments to some projects, partially associated with inflation adjustments to try and cover that on the VDOT side of the house. So again, Miles did a great job noting the biggest messages. The cost estimation office is trying to provide tools and best practices that will help make that successful in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Rivley. Mr. Williams, quickly, obviously this discussion will continue, but yes, sir. You have
Okay. I'll try to be quick. I'm encouraged to hear about the statewide cost estimate book. My first question is that being used with all projects today going through the TPO?
Mr. Bushing, can you feel that? Did you hear it?
Yes, sir. All applications that are being submitted right now, we're actually wrapping up the latest application cycle tomorrow. But they are all required to go and submit the cost estimating workbook. And then obviously VDOT in their validation will also prepare a cost estimating.
Okay, because what I've heard in previous meetings that you had the cost estimates coming from 2 different entities. In some cases, it could come from the locality. In some cases, it came from VDOT. That's what I heard. Does that still exist today?
Yes, sir. So the locality is able to develop the estimate, and that's something that we're going to continue. Localities have additional flexibility in actually getting through construction with the project. The benefit of this approach is it's standardizing how we look at risk, how we look at the assumptions. So it's all putting it in the same format. So we're all speaking the same language. It's easier to compare between VDOT and locality.
So I'll go back to my question. If you've got projects with cost estimates from localities and from VDOT, VDOT's using their statewide cost estimate books now. Is there a requirement that the locality use the same book? And is there any requirement that VDOT signs off on the locality project that comes through scoring and funding through the TPO?
And let me try to cut that. I want to add to that just to make clear your question. I think it's before it comes to this policy board, will there be that VDOT review? In other words, because what happens, it seems like we've gotten a local number, ran with it, then something happens later that's like, oh, this has changed. So does that, I just want to supplement your question a little bit. Is there going to be a change where before this policy board sees it, that it's gone through the new cost estimator?
Sure. So it's been our practice to have VDOT review it, so that's not going to change. What we've done starting last round was to provide the TAC, and we will provide for the policy board as well, the comparison of the 2 estimates. And I think that is what we can offer. The adopted policy from this board as part of the regional funding framework is that if the project is intended to be locally administered, we will defer to the locality in terms of what the cost estimate will be. So that is a policy that this board has approved. We can always change that, obviously, but that's kind of where the sticking point is, I think, on this issue.
One last question, Mr. Chairman, if I may, because I know everybody's anxious to get out, but if it's going to be administered by the locality, is it being administered with funding that comes through the TPO?
Yes.
Yes, okay,
Yes,
so,
yes.
I don't know why we're making a distinction if you're going to be administering the project, and the project includes TPO funding, and that's what we're concerned about. That's the whole topic of discussion right now. It's why we have an overruns. So I want you to take a look at, going back to that, what he just said, what Miles just said, if it's being administered, why should that be different from other projects that are being administered by VDOT? The cost estimate book should be in play for any kind of project that's being, funded through the TPO.
Before it gets a vote.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, that would be a policy change is what I'm learning, right? For locally administered projects.
Yes.
Okay, this is good discussion. Any other thoughts? Okay. We will continue it and I'll try to focus. And I know Mr. Parsons, you'll continue to work with the policy board on that. Let me jump to Ms. Adams at GRTC. We had a great presentation from your group earlier. Do you have a report for us?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. No, I do not. No
Thank-
updates. Thank you.
All right, RRT is not here, I don't believe. And Mr. Sparks from TRTP, I think he had to leave. So that takes us, and I'll come back to Mr. Parsons, I haven't forgotten. That takes us to VDOT, and you gave us a little preview. What else do you have, Mr. Scribble?
I can make it very brief. Our agency comments can be provided to you. I think we've already emailed them to you. We can have them included. We have updates for the CTB meeting that occurred in October. I will tell you that there were updates to the 6-year plan. So if you go online to the public 6-year plan and we're interested in where your project funding sits on any of your UPCs, that's available right now. And that is certainly updated and available. We are also available as staff to answer any questions that folks have regarding any specific funding changes that may have occurred. I will tell you that the next CTB meeting, due to the holidays in November and December, are changed. That there will be no November meeting, and the December meeting is actually the first week in December, currently scheduled for the 6th and 7th. Just like many of the previous meetings have been, sometimes they end up being combined into a single day. So I'll just kind of put that on the radar for folks. Our update has information on the Fall Line Trail, kind of status, big picture, 70,000 foot view. Design build 1, the northern segment of the Fall Line Trail is still expected to go out on the street by the end of the year, with hopefully construction beginning middle and early of 2023. Last thing I'll bring your attention to is we do have a public hearing on the Fall Line Trail northern section, the design public hearing that is November 15th at the Elmont Elementary School on Cedar Lane in Ashland, and that public notice is included in the update that we provided.
Thank you. If you don't mind, can you talk about the different sections, northern section? How many sections are there? And so can I get an idea? Is that all up in Hanover, that northern section?
So this goes essentially from the Chickahominy up to where it connects into Ashland.
So that would be to the center of the universe. That would be from Chickahominy River to the center of the universe.
Correct.
Because I was looking at the city council folks, we were talking about the Reconnect Jackson Ward. There was some talk about the Fall Line Trail. Do y'all have any updates? I know it's just been a few months. Do y'all have any updates on how or between VDOT, the Fall Line Trail through the city of Richmond? And that Reconnect Jackson Ward. I didn't mean to put you on the
No, you're
spot.
fine.
No updates, that's fine. I
am curious as you are as to what the status is on those projects. I have at the last Land Use, Housing and Transportation Committee meeting, which I chaired last month, this was a topic of discussion, and we don't have an answer. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait till maybe the next meeting, which I can hopefully get some more information on updates on what we're doing in that capacity. I do know that the route across the river, as we know, is a key stumbling block, and I think it's an opportunity for a transformational bridge that we have funding for available if we were so to design it, because the infrastructure bill is perfectly aligned to support our pursuit of that if we can figure out where we want to put it.
Mr. Parsons, did you have any update on your end? On this item?
Yes, I can take care of it as part of my report, if that's okay.
Yeah, why don't you just go ahead and CBTA report, and if you have anything on the Fall Line Trail. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 32 is a brief update of all the CBTA meetings and activities that have taken place. I won't dive into anything in particular because I did want to raise, to Mr. Addison's point, on November 2nd, which was yesterday, the Fall Line Working Group met and actually did have a very detailed discussion on the remaining sections of the Fall Line outside of the 2 design build projects that Mr. Rubin mentioned. And I think it was very fruitful and discussed with the remaining committed CBTA funding, what would the potential outlays look like for the outstanding section of the trail. And it looked at primarily focusing on those sections in the center of the region that would be outside of the design build areas, so Chesterfield, City of Richmond, and Henrico County. And it was, I think it'll be very, very good information as we start to compile it in a format that's more digestible to come back and share with this authority, this board, as well as the general public as we begin to move forward with the next sections, because there is still committed funding from the CBTA that has not been actually allocated to any particular segments. And the other benefit of this is it allows us to have more information so we can continue to go out and seek the remaining funding that's necessary to complete the trail. Which, not to put Barb or Sharon on the spot, I believe is about $85 million. It's still outstanding.
Giving some head nods, affirmative head nods on that. All right, did anybody, and I don't know that I give people a chance, those of you who are still hanging in there with us, Mr. Riblet or Mr. Parsons, any questions on their reports? The board. Thank you. All right, future. I think we covered all the reports, agency committee reports. Future meeting topics is there for your review. And by the way, DRPT, I think will post their report. We'll make that available online. Any member comments as we wrap up? So bad.
The meeting December 1st is the same time as the Valor Awards.
It is. It is. I know I was invited and I had to decline. That's tough. Yeah, the Valor Awards is that morning.
Going to the Valor Awards.
So we won't see you.
No, I mean, there's a bit of a fun.
Yeah, there is.
Chesterfield, right, no City of Richmond.
Yeah, that's a real conflict. If it's enough, of a significant conflict, I don't know, can we look at making an adjustment? Do whatever I want. They didn't tell me that.
We have enough time.
Take advantage of it.
And the other question I had was, you really gonna have a January meeting? I'm sorry.
I think it would be early in January. I don't know that it's, and again, I just find I can do whatever I want, so maybe we won't have a January.
January 5th, I mean, usually.
It's early, and I think we might not be sure that
Okay,
we'll be in the new space by then.
okay.
But when we do arrive in the city, I'm going to ask the city to do their highlight. I'm looking forward to that. And thank you, Mr. Hodges, for your presentation earlier for town of lots of exciting things happening in our jurisdictions. So our next meeting right now is December 1st at the VDOT district office. And that conflict you pointed out has come to my attention, and I think lots of others. So we'll consider maybe moving that. Of course, there's a lot going on in December for people. Giving everybody a chance to comment. Yes, Ms. Jordan.
Can I just propose we do the following Thursday, same time?
For the December meeting?
Yeah,
Okay,
as an option,
How about-
consideration.
how about if I let staff look at availability of the location
Okay.
and we'll get on that promptly, make sure that everybody responds to our inquiries if we can move it.
Chair,
Yes,
the thing I know is Plan RVA actually has their meeting the following Thursday
Oh,
at
that's
the same time. Usually follows the week after.
there's gonna, but I think I think we ought to look
Good suggestion.
at moving.
Good to see.
Nobody really goes to Plan RVA, they'd rather go.
Do it the old way.
I go to all of them.
I know you got all of
It
them.
used to be, we went to one in the morning, had lunch, and then one in the afternoon, spent all day there.
Thank you all so much for hanging in, and the presentation again from GRTC. We appreciate it. Well, we are adjourned until sometime in December to be determined.